Good evening, everybody, and thank you for being here this evening for NAVI's webinar of State of the State Education in Philadelphia area. My name is Steve Rosenberg. I'm a consultant in the Jewish community. I do work in fighting anti-Semitism and global Israel advocacy. I am working with NAVI, the North American Values Institute, formerly the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values, which was founded in 2021 by David Bernstein. They fight the curriculum which manifests itself in anti-Semitism in K through 12. I serve as the city director for Philadelphia, helping to get NAVI indoctrinated into Philadelphia, working with parent activists, with school superintendents, with Pennsylvania legislators, with anybody we can to help us advance the cause of fighting anti-Semitism in K through 12 and the curriculum that is helping or not helping in this case, Jewish students and really all students. So I am proud to moderate this panel with three outstanding individuals. Their backgrounds are so incredible. I'm not going to read the resumes. I'm going to let each of them take a few seconds and introduce themselves, starting with Dr. Brandy Shufutinsky, and then Brigette, and then Myles.
Hi, thanks, Steve. I'm really happy to be here and be on this great panel with Brigette, with Myles, and Steve with you moderating, so thank you. My name is Brandy Shufutinsky. I serve as the Director of Education and Community Engagement with NAVI, and I really am looking forward to this discussion. I think it's really important for us to get community members involved and aware of what's actually happening in the K-12 school system in our area, and also figure out ways that parents, community members can kind of join in and make sure that our kids are getting the education that they deserve. So thank you.
Brigette.
Thank you. Brigette Herbst. I work in the nonprofit think tank education policy arena. I've been very active in both education, teaching, coaching, and now kind of in the policy think tank world for over 20 years now. So very excited to do this, very excited to be on with this great panel of experts. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Steve, and thank you, NAVI, for having me. Grateful to be here. My name is Myles Mendoza. I'm a partner at Oak Rose Group. We're a consulting firm. And I come to the work with NAVI first as a parent, experiencing some of this firsthand in the Chicago suburbs, but then also as a longtime policy advocate, having worked for Democrats for Education Reform, worked as a social worker for multiple children's hospitals, and am supporting the development of ecosystem around the country for NAVI.
That's great. Thank you all. So here's the way it's going to work tonight. I have a series of questions that we'll talk to Myles, Brigette, and Brandy about. If you all have questions, you can type them in and we'll get to them at the end. This should last about an hour, give or take, depending on how fast our speakers talk and how much I listen and not talk. But we have some really important stuff to go over. As you know, Philadelphia area is not great when it comes to K through 12 education. We in Philadelphia have seen what's been going on at the University of Pennsylvania, at Temple, at Swarthmore, at other colleges. But what you haven't heard a lot about in the last few years is what's been going on in K through 12. You know, we all know what's going on in Israel with Hamas and Hezbollah. And one of the analogies that I like to use is that we all know about the tunnels that Hamas has built digging back into Israel from the south, or Hezbollah from the north. Well, Hamas has built tunnels in this country as well. They're called schools, and they've indoctrinated our schools for the last 20 some years through education. And while there's been so much talk about colleges, it's time that we really focus in on the K through 12 space, because if we don't fight for our kids right now, by the time they get to college, they're lost and they don't have the tools to fight, whether it's anti-Semitism or any hatred. So let's dive right in. This is a question for all of you. We'll start with you, Brigette, and then we'll go to Brandy and then Myles. Education in the Philadelphia region is at a crossroads. From your vantage point, what are the most pressing challenges facing K through 12 education in our area today?
I think two things come to mind immediately. I think the first one maybe being the most important, which is reading and writing. I think, you know, it's in the news every day how low nationally the reading and writing scores are. This is not unique to Philadelphia. It's a national problem. I think parents are fully aware. If you look at enrollment, particularly in Philadelphia, school enrollment is way down, because I think, parents understand that this basic learning is not happening, and they're not sending their kids to school to train their kids to be activists. They're sending their kids to school to learn how to read and to do math and learn about, basic American values. They're not sending them there to become activists. And I think the other big issue that comes up, and I think Brandy will talk about a lot of how this kind of all interplays together, but I think one of the biggest things that I hear from the teachers that I work with is discipline. We've kind of moved into this restorative justice mode of discipline, and it doesn't allow teachers to have classroom management. It doesn't allow teachers to deal with behavior problems in their classroom, and that impacts every kid in the classroom that's there trying to learn.
Great, thank you. Brandy?
I agree. Yeah, I agree with all of the points that Brigette made. I'll add a couple. I think that what the issues that we're really seeing are indicative of a dysfunctional education system. So there are administrators, there are educators who are really dedicated, really hardworking, want to put their students front and center, student learning front and center. And then there are those who have a different agenda. And unfortunately, specifically in the school district of Philadelphia, some of those folks that have their own agenda seem to be in charge of a lot of very specific things that directly impact student learning and the health of a school climate and school environment. So we have activist teachers who are using their pulpit at the front of the classroom to bring a certain ideology that is anti-American, that is anti-Jewish, that is anti-liberal, that's illiberal, and they're bringing that into the classroom, and it's being normalized. And some of the ways we're seeing that normalized, as Brigette pointed out, is through certain programs. The restorative justice program is just one of a few that proved to be problematic. And then we see the results being very low academic outcomes, where you have roughly 30% of kids who are proficient in reading and mathematics.
Myles?
Yeah, I think I've had the privilege of watching Philadelphia and watching cities throughout the country related to education reform for a long time. And it used to be that parents had a voice. And I think the number one biggest issue right now is parents don't have a voice. They don't get heard, and they don't matter when they're part of, minority community. And in this case, it's the Jewish community. I think that's become a minority community within the Philadelphia region. And way back when there was an education reform ecosystem, organizations working to help provide accountability, create talent pipelines, more transparency on data. And for whatever reason, that community changed and now is focused on all kinds of different things. They're no longer focused on reading and writing and making sure that you're at proficiency and accelerated on learning. It's become social justice. So I think there's a lack of empowerment for parents needing a voice at the table to ask for more for their kids.
Great answers from all of you. Thank you very much. Myles, I'm going to stick with you. So you've worked with NAVI on taking a deep dive into the ecosystem of the Philadelphia region. From your perspective, what do you see as the biggest strengths, and conversely, where are the most glaring weaknesses in the Philadelphia region?
Yeah, the biggest strength, I have to say, even as a parent, when this happened in my region, the best part was finding common people and kind of bridging together and being part of a community that didn't exist until October 8th. And I think in Philadelphia, that's part of, I think, the beauty and the strength of, it's a silver lining. There are a lot of great people who are coming together. But at the same time, Philadelphia it's in a bad place. So the ability to become public on these issues, it's tough because there are real consequences politically, philanthropically, financially with your job. So there isn't a lot of public facing leadership. The coalition is there, but it needs more formal support. So within Philadelphia, it's just very problematic, especially in comparison to other regions. But what I think is a strength is that in the state of Philadelphia, there is a place where people are heard. There is the tension in the state in terms of its political dynamics, make it a place where I think you can have a voice in the state on behalf of Philadelphia. So there are opportunities if there's more community that gather and start to focus and coordinate.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I just want to, before I get to you, Bridget, I'm coming to you next, is, I'm working in Philadelphia with literally hundreds of parent activists. And I know many of you are on right now. And first of all, thank you all for being here tonight and giving us an hour of your time. But without your incredible dedication, your hard work, your willingness to jump in the pool, sometimes head first, not feet first, whether it's the cold water or the warm water, you don't even know. The people that I've met already knew, work with, talk to, amazing group of people. And there is a lot of support. I know it's like watching the minute hand on the clock. It doesn't always seem like there's victory or the time is actually moving, but it is moving and progress is happening. And as I said earlier in my intro, it took 20 years for us to get to this point, as Brandy is going to allude to further. We're not going to fix this today. We're not going to fix this tomorrow. And we're not going to fix this by Passover 24, 25, I guess we're in now. This is a process and it's a long process, but Myles, you're so right. The gathering of the people in this region of brotherly love and sisterly affection warms your heart, and it gives me the motivation and the inspiration to continue to do the work that I want to do. And I know that all of you want to do. So Bridget, moving on to you. You work extensively with parents who want more control over their children's education. What do you see as the biggest barriers parents face when trying to advocate for their kids in not just the Philadelphia schools, but regionally as well?
Again, I think there's two major things at play here. One, I think, is I hope at least well-meaning school boards. I think some of them may be uninformed. Some of them may have alliances and allegiances to things that they shouldn't have. So, I think when parents are looking to get involved, starting at the school board level is obviously the place they want to go first. And I think, working with teachers for a long time now, what we've seen is that the other biggest problem is the teachers union. So in order to become the protector of the teachers, a lot of times what the teachers unions do is they kind of drive this wedge in between the parents and the administrators. So the parents are kind of on an island on their own. They don't feel like they can have a relationship with the administration. They're kind of closed off from the school board. And the union is kind of using this to their advantage to gain power with both the administration and with the teachers. I think Brandy, I know, and Myles, you'll probably touch on this too, but a lot of these buzzwords that we hear like CRT and SEL, I think they sound really good to well-meaning school board people, and they want to have these great communities, but they're kind of losing the light they need to focus on, which is just basically educating students. I got an email from AFT, and they have an arm of their union called Share My Lesson. So it sounds very well-meaning. It sounds like a great place that teachers can go to coordinate with each other, share really good lessons. But this particular one, and I'm going to read it just so I get it right. It was called Join Us for Wellness, Personal Transformation Through Collective Resistance. We'll have candid conversations about social and systemic inequalities. I don't think this is what teachers are looking for. This is not what parents are looking for. This is not what teachers are looking for. They're actually looking for, real solid lessons on how can I teach kids who are so far behind how to catch up in reading, how to catch up in math. So I think when parents are going and looking to be active, those are the two places they really should start.
Great, thank you. Brandy, much of NAVI's work focuses on challenging radical educational policies, as you know better than anybody. What have been the biggest successes in shifting the conversation so far in the K through 12 space?
I think overall the biggest success we've had is parents are activated, and so they're able to be involved. And as both Bridget and Myles mentioned, that's one of the bigger hurdles: parents and community members being able to be actively involved in their school district. But if we look at specifics, we can also look at what gets uncovered. So if there's a specific policy, whether it's the ones that may sound good, like SEL or restorative justice, but if there's a specific policy in place, which we found in school districts across the country, that say violates maybe civil rights laws, well, one thing that we've done at NAVI is we've been able to help parents advocate either at the school board level or at the state or federal level with elected officials to get those policies reversed or removed out of the schools. And Pennsylvania has many of those in school districts across the area and the region, Philadelphia, the school district of Philadelphia specifically. And honestly, that's one of the reasons why I think the court ruling came out, or the OCR ruling came out against the district, and how they were not following civil rights legislation when it came to addressing anti-Jewish bigotry within the school district.
Right, but as we both know, that OCR ruling really only just says that they have to do what they should have been doing all along, and it's not really as favorable as we might otherwise want it to be, and further steps are going to have to be taken. But that's another, we'll get to that.
I just want to add one thing. I agree with you 100%, and I think that the parent involvement and also other eyes being on the school district makes that even more possible, because we know that, exactly like you said, this isn't going to be fixed by Pesach. There are multiple steps to this, but we've taken the first steps and we've been successful in it.
Yeah, Brandy, I'm going to stick with you as we go into another set of questions. We hear a lot about the word equity, not equitable, but equity, particularly as it relates to DEI in education and other places too, but we're talking about education. In practice, how has this concept been applied or misapplied? And obviously, is it helping or hurting students from your perspective?
So I want to make a distinction between equity and equality, and how equity seems to be applied to the K through 12 school system. Right now, what we're seeing done under equity policies is programming being taken away so that kids finish at the same spot. For example, school districts across the country, Seattle Public School Districts, a couple of school districts in Northern California and others, have removed honors and AP classes because they say that they were inequitable. So kids who had challenges with certain subjects, who maybe weren't going to be in an honors or AP class, but they were going to be kind of in the regular leveled class, or maybe a class with more supports, could the argument given was they feel bad about themselves because they're not in the honors or AP classes. So we're just going to do away with those classes and kind of disregard the needs of the students who are excelling in those subjects. And that's how equity policies seem to be rolling out in the K-12 system in many instances. I'm sure there are places where they aren't, but we deal mostly with the problem. So that's what I'm going to speak to. A specific example of an equity policy in school district of Philadelphia is they have an equity framework. And I just want to read one point on their equity lens, which says that resources, funding, personnel, professional development would be necessary to successfully enact the current and or recommended changes to this proposed policy, program, practice, decision, or action. And it instructs people to consider race and other identifiers. I mean, I'm not an attorney, but that sounds like it violates civil rights if it's directing a district and teachers and administrators to consider race. This is the school district of Philadelphia's equity framework that they're practicing under.
Yeah, I'm not an attorney either, obviously, but I agree, and I'm sure I know there are attorneys on this webinar right now, and I'll be talking to them tomorrow. So thank you for pointing that out. Myles, moving to you. As you worked on some of the mapping, and I know you've worked all over the place, but do you see patterns emerging in Philadelphia that you've seen other places? Do you see patterns going from district to district that give you pause for concern, or indicators that suggest something else is going, the next domino to fall? Like, how do you visualize all of this?
Yes. So, again, in kind of comparing all of the different regions around the country, there was definitely a pattern where there's multiple categories of people. So there are some people who are public and they're advocates. They're few and far between. And in Philadelphia, I think culturally, it's the most challenging place. And this term being structurally restrained, we created that term really out of Philadelphia because there are people where there are real consequences for coming forward. But I think in contrast, looking to a place like Chicago, where it's just so visible and on display, very clearly anti-Semitic behavior on behalf of our mayor, city council, and that transparency in some ways has become the power people have moved from structurally restrained to public advocates. So, I'm a free speech advocate. I think sunshine is the best disinfectant. And the more there is an ability to get this information out, like it all exists in these WeChats. There's just so much content out there. And the challenge is moving from structurally restrained to public advocate. In places like Chicago, there's a new app I saw called Classroom Champ, where they're creating anonymous technology that anonymously allows you to upload and broadcast. I don't think it's available for Philadelphia, but there's just a lot of creative solutions that people, when they get together and they form a network, they tend to create different options. And I think that gives me hope for Philadelphia, that more daylight will actually help fix this problem.
That's great. And I agree with you on the sunshine, except when you have a hairline like mine and yours, you got to wear a hat and sunscreen. Yeah. Brigette, I want to follow up on the question that I asked Brandy around DEI. We've all been vocal about the role of DEI in shaping school policies. How do you think that we distinguish between inclusive education and ideological overreach that undermines parents' rights?
I think, it's very important for educators to be cognizant of where children are coming from, where they are, what they know. When I was teaching kindergarten, I had kindergartners come in that were reading, but I also had kindergartners that came in that didn't even know which way to hold a book. So, when you have a classroom like that, you're going to have kids at all different levels. And I think, what Brandy spoke to before about getting rid of AP classes and things like that is, the answer is not to bring down the standard for everyone. The answer is to meet each of those kids where they are. So, lowering the standard, I guess that is equitable, but it's certainly not fair, and it's certainly not the right thing to do. So, I think the best thing that educators, that parents can do is, figure out where your children are, figure out where your students are, and meet them where they are. And, if you have kids that are excelling, then create programs and allow those kids to excel. And if you have kids that need extra help, that need, more attention, then those resources need to be focused on those kids.
Great, thank you. Brandy, back to you. They're all important questions, but this is, I think, what a lot of people are super interested in. I know that NAVI has a much broader strategy for combating critical race theory, CRT, and critical social justice, CSJ, in education. What lessons from your extensive work all over the country and in this district do you think can be applied in this area? And what role do you see organizations like NAVI, in particular NAVI, because we have such a unique space in fighting the CRT and CSJ in K through 12, playing and shaping national conversations on educational policy?
I think first and foremost, we need to kind of decide, and maybe that's a national conversation or a community conversation. What's the purpose of education? What's the purpose of our K through 12 schools? Now, our position is that the K through 12 schools serve a purpose of creating healthy, productive members of our democratic republic. And in order to do that, students have to be provided the tools necessary so they can participate and understand the responsibilities and the rights of being a citizen. And one strategy that we've taken that's been successful across demographics, like community members, parents, taxpayers, teachers, students, is the desire for academic excellence. It's one of the reasons why so many parents are now pushing and supportive of all different types of school choice, whether it's vouchers or educational savings accounts or something, because parents want the ability to put their kids in the school that's going to give them the best shot at learning and achieving whatever that learning may be. In America, kids go to 12 or 13 years of school, depending on whether they go to kindergarten or not. And at the end of that time, when kids graduate high school, they should have the tools necessary to enter the workforce or to go on to higher education, to pursue a trade. And in order to do that, you have to have a certain basic foundation of scholarship and academic excellence. You have to know how to read. You have to know how to do a certain level of math. You have to have a basic understanding of civics. And so I think that what we do is focus on those things and counter to what we're seeing where people are unfortunately, some nefarious actors are focused more on ideology and dogma that's replacing scholarship and academic excellence.
Great, thank you. Myles, I want to come back to you, and you're newer to the Philadelphia region and studying, but this is really a broader question. So, we've done a lot of work in both the Lower Merion School District and the Philadelphia School District, and economically very diverse, right? Philadelphia's an inner city school district. Lower Merion is one of the more affluent school districts in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So, and throughout Pennsylvania, many of these districts there's no issues of funding, right? Pennsylvania is a pretty well-funded state educationally. So even in the highest funded, highest demographic areas, we see these issues. So this is not an issue of demographics or of socioeconomics. This issue pops up everywhere. And I know where you are, the same thing. What do you think is the root cause from where you've studied this? Because it's not monetary based. So where's it coming from?
I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of times educators will say, if it wasn't for all of the problems outside of our school, we would be doing very well. And it's similar to a hospital saying, if it wasn't for all these sick patients, all of our patients would be doing very well. This is just what schools do. Your job is to take kids from wherever they come from and to educate them. And that happens when you have the ability to hold your staff accountable, help improve their performance. Getting the talent, making sure there's an accountability system. A lot of that happens when parents have a voice, because when parents don't have the power of exit, then they don't really matter. So, Brandy's point before around school choice, that is a lever. It exists in the state of Pennsylvania. It's just that middle and upper middle income parents don't qualify. So, when I think about what kind of opportunities are there for Philadelphia parents, the first one is what I said before: gather, form community. In numbers with a network, you have power. But there is the option of, is there an opportunity to qualify for that scholarship program, to have the power of exit? Because I think without that, I worry it's been so long that I don't know how the school system all of a sudden decides that it wants to hold their staff accountable and concentrate on the things inside the school that matter, rather than trying to wait for everything else outside the school to be fixed before they can actually perform.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you. Brigette, turning to you. Well, NAVI doesn't really have a vote or a dog in the fight about school choice. I want to ask you something about school choice here. It's obviously a growing movement across the country, obviously in the Philadelphia region as well. In your opinion, what does meaningful school choice look like in Philadelphia, but in other major metropolitan areas as well? And what reforms would move the needle in the right direction for both parents, students, and educators?
Along what Myles said is, school choice is great, and it does allow parents to choose how their children are going to be educated. I think, the problem is that unless you really focus on making sure that it works for everybody, it's not going to work for everybody. And it's either only going to work for, a very high social economic group that's going to be able to easily move their children to another school. Or, if you set it at a very low income, then, you're going to miss a whole middle class that may also be able to take advantage of it. I think we sometimes focus on the fact that it's just about the money, and it's not necessarily just about the money. I think, if you're a two-parent working family or a one-parent family and you have several kids and you want to send your kids to a different school and you're working, 40, 50 hours a week, driving your kids to another school so that they can get a better education may not be an option for you. So I think those are the things that, lawmakers in Pennsylvania really need to think about. It's not just about giving people, $20,000 so that they can use at any school. It's about making sure that all of their needs are met, whether it be transportation, whether it be after school care, anything that's going to make that transition easier for people.
Great, thank you. Brandy, you work at the probably agonizing intersection of policy and grassroots activism. God bless you. Thank you for what you do. What are the most effective strategies for parents and educators that want to push back against what we're seeing in schools right now? How do you advise them?
First of all, awareness, to actually know what's going on, to be able to understand that if your kid's coming home with a specific assignment, and the wording, it has some of the, critical social justice wording in it. It's asking them to segregate themselves based on an immutable characteristic, something that sounds like it probably goes against civil rights. To be aware of that, to be aware of the rights and responsibilities that students have, that parents have, what's the education code that really dictates how a school is supposed to operate. Because one of the things that we've seen is we've seen a lot of schools, a lot of teachers, a lot of administrators put forward policies, probably because they sound really good and they're very well intentioned. And those people don't realize that those policies are violating existing education code. So 1 is awareness. 2 is knowing who to contact when something is going wrong. 3 is knowing how to communicate what it is that's gone wrong. Because I think most parents are pretty protective over our children. So it would be easy to get really emotional when something's going wrong with our kids, which is fine. It's perfectly natural. And we have to be able to communicate effectively, rationally, to the point about what's actually going wrong, and offer a suggestion on what should happen next, or a few different suggestions. Be able to ask questions, be able to not be as structurally restrained as some communities are. And Myles makes a very valid point, especially when we're looking at School District of Philadelphia, where a group of parents tried to do all of these things and a teacher retaliated against them. And so, I don't want to minimize that threat, because it is there. And groups like ours, like NAVI, exist so that because we're not structurally restrained, and we can kind of be that person and that voice for parents who otherwise need to maybe be a little bit quieter because of the threat of retaliation.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Myles, if policymakers and parents could take just one key insight from your research and the work that you've done and act on it quickly, what would you tell them?
I think probably the most important thing, again, is having power. So the ability to enact policy really comes from a couple things. One, media. Schools respond to negative media. They respond to lawsuits. They respond to elections, and then they respond to policy. So, you need those things, but none of those things happen in isolation. Philadelphia is blessed to have generous funders who are supporting some of this work. So I think there are opportunities to gather. And when there is that policy agenda and there is a priority, Pennsylvania itself has that opportunity. I think a key part of that will be focusing on the things that you have in common and less on the things that you don't have in common, because it's a purple state and there are Republicans who are willing to join with the Democrats generally of Philadelphia to align on various issues. So being able to focus on the things you agree on to advance policy, to me, is a strategy that Philadelphians need to embrace.
Great answer. Brigette, this is next. By the way, if you have questions, please put them up. After this, we're going to go through a quick lightning round where we'll ask questions to each of these, then we're going to get to your Q&A. So I see a lot of comments, but if there are very specific questions, please post them. So Brigette, we hear a lot about lawfare. We've heard about Title VI cases. There are Title VII harassment cases that are now popping up. So what role does lawfare play in education reform? And what should parents and guardians know about using legal action as a tool for meaningful change, understanding that lawfare typically is a long tail play. You don't file a suit today and get an answer tomorrow. We need lots of different lawsuits against some of these school districts to really make meaningful change. But how should these parents really think about using lawfare as a meaningful tool?
I think, unfortunately in 2025 in America, not much gets done unless there's a lawsuit. I think it's just the way of the world now. If you want to make some kind of change, there's usually a lawsuit involved. It's good for the lawyers, I guess. I don't know if it's good for the rest of us. But, I have personal experience with this. I had to sue my children's school district right when we had moved. What I learned from this was that you're definitely putting yourself out there. So, as Myles talked about before, it's easy to go in a WhatsApp group and talk about these things, but it takes a different kind of person to be willing to do the right thing and put yourself out there. But I think putting yourself out there is worthwhile. So, I thought about just shutting down Facebook and not looking at the news articles about me suing the school district because I was getting a lot of, negative comments. But at the same time, in my inbox, I was getting messages from other parents that were having the same issue. And if I had shut down that communication and said, this isn't worth it, I'm getting bullied, I don't want my name in the news. If I had done all of that, I wouldn't have been able to help the other 200 kids that were helped because of our lawsuit. So, it's not an easy thing. Being in a lawsuit is never, something that's fun that people want to do. But I think, you need to look at the world and you need to say somebody needs to do something about this, and it has to be me.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're right, and I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg for these lawsuits, and over the course of the next probably 2 to 5 years, hopefully it doesn't take 5 years, but I think we're going to see a lot more Title VI, Title VII. I believe there's also going to start to be class action suits. I think there are attorneys out there building classes right now. I don't know what that will look like, but we've only just begun, as the song said. So I want to move into a cross-panel, like lightning round type situation here. I'm going to ask one question, and we'll just go Brandy, Myles, Brigette for each question, and if you guys could answer it as to the best of your ability. Brandy, if you could rewrite one policy in the Philadelphia school system overnight, what would it be?
I think probably the qualifications of who can be a teacher.
I think if I had a mic, I would drop it, but I don't have one here. Brigette, how about you?
Controversial one. My teenagers hate this, but a cell phone ban. They did it in our school district. My children fought tooth and nail, but let me tell you that every single one of them has asked me to buy them a book recently, and they are sitting in school reading a book. So
wow,
it's life-changing.
Wow, your kids asked you for a book.
I know. I was very proud of that.
I feel like if my kids asked me for a book, they would use it to hit me over the head with it. I don't know if they can read. Myles, how about you?
Transparency. I think when you have transparency laws, it empowers parents. When parents have information, that's the first step in recognizing the problem, which is always the first step in creating a solution.
Great answers. Brandy, back to you. What is one data point or fact about Philadelphia schools that more people need to know? It doesn't just have to be about Philadelphia School District. It could be about Lower Merion. It could be about anything. What do people need to know?
They're failing. I mean, when you have kids at 30% reading, 30% numeracy, they're failing, and they're failing at a high cost to the taxpayer.
Brigette?
Yes, and I think I went through a lot of data today. I think the one that people need to be really, really careful about when they're reading the news is teacher shortages. So between 2020 and 2025, the enrollment in Philadelphia School District declined by 85,000 students. The number of employees in the school district increased by almost 4,000 adults. So, when they're telling you there's a teacher shortage, there may not be a teacher shortage. There may just be a misuse of funds.
Wow. Myles?
So I won't give you a data point, but I would say that my research showed that there's a collective illusion, that there is a mass of people in Philadelphia who see things, are structurally restrained, and don't know about the others. So that there is just a lot of people that are quietly holding resentments that aren't public about their position.
Great. This next question is an important one. And we actually had a comment from one of our viewers here is how do we, Brandy, back to you, how do we go about building broader coalitions that are not just Jewish parents? Because this curriculum, CRT, CSJ, all of this curriculum impacts negatively every student. The 30% that you're talking about, Brandy, who are reading, that's just not Jewish kids. That's all kids. So this curriculum negatively impacts everybody. Equity negatively impacts everybody. So how do you think the best way, I know what I'm doing, but how do you, Brandy and Brigette and Myles, think the best way to go about building broad coalitions with the Black community, the Hindu community, the Latin community, the Asian community, all other communities other than Jews?
So Myles mentioned it. I think it really is focusing on what we have in common. And again, I really do not believe that parents wake up and send their kids to school for them to learn to be activists. Most parents across demographics send their kids to school so they can learn something. So focusing on academic excellence.
Great.
Yeah, I think the focus should be on who is this for? This is about the students. You know, a first grader, a third grader, they don't care what your religion is. They don't care what color of your skin. They don't care your political party. They just want you to advocate for them and make their world good. That's all kids want at the end of the day.
Myles.
Yeah, I think it's about, again, it's finding the similarities, but it's also these core principles. The Jewish community has incredible core principles that over a long period of time have extended into other communities. I think seeing, we talked to a leader in the Black Pastors United for Education. There's just a lot of people out there who I think really align with these issues. And so find that kind of common core principle and bring people together.
Great. Where should parents be focusing their energies if they want to make an impact in their child's school today, Brandy?
Depends on their level of like time commitment and their skills and abilities, whether it's running for school board, volunteering on the curriculum committee, volunteering in your kid's classroom to read them stories to see what types of books they have available. Just get involved. I mean, that's my 2 cents. However you can as a parent, as a community member, just show up.
I would agree with Brandy 100%. Pay attention. If people haven't listened to the podcast Sold a Story, it's really great. But it talks a lot about reading curriculum. And I'm always struck by the story of the one mother who was also a teacher. And she talks about how her child was supposed to be learning to read in school, and she was a teacher. And it took her several years before she realized that her own child wasn't learning how to read. So Philly's part of that. Philly paid over $2 million for a reading program that didn't teach kids how to read. So I think parents really, you can't just send your kid to school and assume that all of these things are happening. You really need to dive deep into what your kids are learning.
Awesome.
My answer would be the number 15. When I worked in politics, I would have legislators say, my phone is blowing up. So what's going on? What happened? Well, I had 15 phone calls. I'm like, 15? That's not a lot. But the idea of, I would give the advice of open up your home, open up your living room, get people together and get 15 people who can really make some noise. It matters. It's a small number. It's always a small number of very active people who can make a big difference.
I have one final question, and we do have a number of excellent questions from our audience. This conversation doesn't end after a 1-hour webinar. What are the next steps for those that are listening, that are going to listen after we post this up? We talked about getting involved, but beyond that, right? Like what else? What other actions? Brandy, we know that we have identified 6 people that are going to run for school board in Lower Merion. We know that we want people to take these other actions. So one thing that I'll sort of maybe answer my own question is info@NAVI values, NAVI values.org. You can email us there, and I will put you in touch, as will Brandy, with some of the Jewish Family Association groups that are already existing. There are hundreds and hundreds of people that are involved in these groups already. If you want to learn more about what we're doing, we're moving the needle here. Brigette and Myles and Brandy, jump in here. But getting involved, as you just heard from these three panelists, that's the key. And it could be as simple as going to your kid's school and reading a book, depending on how old they are. But at the way kids are reading, you may need to do that even at 12th grade, right, Brandy? I mean, it seems like kids just can't read. But you have to get involved. You can't sit on the sidelines. Educating your kids is a participatory sport. It's no longer back in the day when I was growing up, you got sent off to school, you came back with an education, and you moved on. They need help. I mean, I guess any final words from the three of you before we get to the viewer questions?
No, I mean, I think that we covered it, the getting involved. I just want to point out one thing. Although we as American Jews may have the biggest target on us or be the first to be targeted right now, what's happening in our schools is impacting all kids, Jews and non-Jews alike, and also teachers. So I think that we also need to pay attention to, all of us, that this is not just an issue of anti-Jewish bigotry. Our kids are actually facing a failing education system that impacts all of us.
Yeah, I agree. Make yourself known, make sure that you go to the school board meetings, know who's on the school board, know where their alliances lie, know your children's teachers. As my teenagers call me a Karen all the time, but that's what you want. When you walk into the school, you want them to know who you are. When you email your kid's teacher, you want them to know who you are. They don't, you don't want to be someone they've never talked to until May when your child's failing and now you need to figure things out. So I agree with Brandy. Make yourself known, know who all the players are.
Yeah, and I would say grab the silver lining and hold on tight. There's a benefit, right? There's all these relationships to be able to have, and when you make it worth your time and wanting to spend time with other people, that network forms. And I think Brandy said it. You need to know your resources. You need to know how to deploy them when the opportunity presents itself. And having enjoyable activities where you gather people together will naturally create the network, and emergent opportunities will follow.
Great. So let me get to the questions. There's some really good questions here. These are being read in no specific order. Brigette, I think this one is really for you. It's really more of a comment, but there's a question in here. A question is about the NEA and having several anti-Israel caucuses. Can you give the viewers just a quick answer about both teachers unions and where they stand on anti-Semitism or anti-Israel work?
Yeah, I think both teachers unions publicly may not, be forward facing and telling you they're supporting Hamas. But, I think a lot of the curriculum that's coming out, a lot of the support that was given to the college protests, a lot of that was coming from a lot of the activists that are very involved in the teachers union. So, I think there's a lot of good that teachers unions can do if they focus on representing the teachers. But I think when they become social activists, they kind of lose the plot a little bit.
Okay. Here is a question. There's a couple of these questions. Should we keep an eye on public libraries or books generally in school libraries? Do you have any sense? Anybody can answer. Whoever knows this the best. What's the situation with libraries and schools and books and available books, or books being banned or not being able to read? Where does that sit?
So I'm happy to answer a little bit about this. So it's always important to make sure you pay attention to what type of media your children are consuming. And also the type of media that they're consuming in schools. So my kids do not have a cell phone ban at school, and they have laptops and technology that I wish they weren't using. I'd rather they have a notebook and a pencil, but whatever. There are certain websites that are blocked because kids aren't allowed to access certain things at school because the schools don't endorse that material. I would say the same type of criteria should exist for school libraries. Now, if a parent wants their kid to read a particular book that a school library doesn't carry, then that parent has every right to go to a public library or go to a store and buy that book for their kid. But what we've seen is a disproportionate criteria on what kids can maybe access using school internet and what's just freely available in the school library. And one of the reasons this is super important, especially now in the post October 7th, after Hamas massacred all of Israelis on October 7th, is that there's this huge push of kids literature that justifies terrorism. and it's finding its way into school libraries. So I don't think that, given that, it's not a surprise when we see the type of behaviors these kids are doing on college campuses where they're not blocking Jewish students from going to class. I mean, it's happening right now at Columbia as we speak. So I think it's important for parents to pay attention to what type of propaganda may be being disseminated in their kids' school library.
Okay. Bridget or Myles, anything else before I move on?
I would just say, I think part of that, Brandy's right on, and I think part of that is really doing the research. We worked with a group of parents in one school district in Pennsylvania, and the school librarian was buying books like individually or in very small batches so that it didn't flag anything with the school board. It wasn't like an expense that was anything that the school board needed to approve. So a lot of these books were kind of getting into the library very sneakily. So I think it's something that parents definitely need to be aware of.
Okay. Here's an interesting question. Do you, and again, for anybody, do you think, as we know, President Trump has signed a multitude of executive orders related to many topics, but do any of you think that any of these executive orders will actually end up making significant changes to our policies? I
think they can. I mean, an order is as good as enforcement. I think one of the biggest things that it demonstrates is there's a certain segment of parents and students and teachers that want those types of orders. They want how they want their schools to follow those types of orders. So I think if anything, at least it's a demonstration of what how parents want out of K through 12 schools.
Yeah, and I think I also, I've mentioned that Philadelphia feels locked up, and I think the EOs can serve as an icebreaker. So, could it be one person who becomes unlocked and not structurally restrained and feels empowered to do something? Maybe, and that may be the catalyst that allows all these other people who believe there's a collective illusion to kind of break the fever.
Okay. Can any of the speakers comment on the state of related services? I presume that means like IEPs or something in schools as they relate to DEI and CRT.
Anything special education related is, it's considered a civil right. So it's, I don't think going to fall under the same category, even if, we're looking at those executive orders and, the Department of Education is eliminated, though all of those services are still guaranteed in law for those students. So those services would just have to move to a different department. I don't see any of that going away. I don't see any need for concern in any of that kind of stuff.
Okay.
What I think on related services, though, if that question relates at all to like social emotional learning, affinity groups, there are a lot of things outside of the curriculum that are huge high priorities. I think they sound great in presentation, but the implementation of them, that really can be the root of a lot of these issues.
Okay. This is an interesting question. What about filing complaints against individual teachers with the college that grants their accreditation? If a few are fired, might that move the needle?
I don't know. Brandy, you want to go first? I have an idea on it, but go ahead.
I do too. Maybe it's the same one. We'll see. I look at, so I'm a social worker like Myles. I have a license. Teachers have a credential. If they're violating the terms of that credential, I would think that complaints could be filed at that level with the state, because states, the credentials come from the states, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And they do have a complaint process that where parents, community members can file a complaint there. I don't know, Bridget, if that's what you were.
Yes, along those lines, I think, with teachers, because they have not only the protection of the union, but they also have civil service rights. It's very hard to do that. I mean, particularly, I've seen cases across the country, actually. There's quite a few that come to mind in New York where, you had teachers that were accused of horrific, child abuse, and it still took a long time to get them, through the process, get their certification revoked. I don't know that that's necessarily the most effective way to go about it.
Yeah, I've definitely had a lot of experience with the rubber rooms in New York, rubber rooms in Los Angeles, Chicago. It's extremely hard to get a teacher fired. And I also think the issue around accreditation, that actually is a priority that's bubbling up around colleges. But as of today, there is not a solution to that. And I would not expect any consequence whatsoever. It is a system that is really beholden to the teachers' unions. Up and down every state, even red states, it is locked up.
Okay, there's one last question before I get to that. Somebody did ask a question about what specifically happened in Philadelphia. If you email us at info@navivalues.org and you put your name and your email or your phone number, I will call you personally and we'll go over all of that in detail. That we would need another hour just to go through that, but I'm happy to explain all of that to you. Again, that's oh, Mark has it up on the screen here. So this is a Lower Merion specific question. In the Lower Merion School District, the district is making the educational gap a priority and asking for even more programs to help with it. We already have so many programs for this that aren't working. How do we combat them from spending more of our money on this when they should be looking at ways to fix what they already have?
I mean, I would ask I think it's pretty obvious that any program that is brought into a district should be based on data showing that it works. And when people look at the achievement gap and you have administrators say they want to focus on closing it, then I would hope they would be spending that money on things like reading specialists and math tutors. Unfortunately, that's not usually what we see. We usually see school district administrators say, oh, there's an achievement gap, and so we need more DEI or we need more SEL, which those funds could be spent on reading specialists and math tutors. I think every program that spends public money should have to show that it works. And there should also be a policy or some type of plan that if it's not working, there's an out. So what are you going to do if this isn't working, if the achievement gap isn't closing?
So I said that was going to be the last question, but one more just popped up and it's a good one. The question is, as a non-Jew who's worked for the district for the past 15 years, what's one effective talking point I could use to make inroads when addressing some of these broader issues of anti-Semitism with other employees during our next DEI session? So first, I would say thank you for that great question. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being interested in this important work. So if you could answer this person's question, any of you, but that's a great question.
As another non-Jew, very involved in this work, I will tell you that for me personally, this isn't just about being Jewish. This is about being American. Jewish values are American values. Israel is our biggest ally in the Middle East. So, this isn't just about being Jewish. This is about the values that you have as American. This is a value that you have as wanting to live in a democracy. So, it goes far beyond just being Jewish. It has to do with how you want to live your life and how you want your country to go on.
Great, thank you. So I want to leave you with two things. First of all, three things. I want to thank Myles, Brigette, and Brandy. I don't know about you all, but I feel smarter than I did at 7 o'clock, which is not saying a lot for me, but hopefully you all are much smarter also. We have, if you like this program, there's a program on March 3rd with the great Helen Pluckrose, an incredible author who's another expert in this field. Look at navivalues.org for all of our great programs and tune into that one. It's on Monday, March 3rd. I also want to say that a lot of you that are on here that know me or have been involved with my work know that I am literally grew up in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. And Fred Rogers will always be a hero to me. I talk about him, I write about him often. And my favorite quote is that Mr. Rogers said is, when I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. And I could tell you that these three are helpers. I do what I can to help. NAVI is here to help. We're new, we're nimble, we're agile, we are scrappers, we're fighters, we're not afraid to get down and dirty. We're going to help flip school boards. We're going to help fight this radical ideology that's indoctrinating your kids and your grandkids and your nieces and your nephews and your neighbors, whether you're a Jew, African American, an Asian, I don't care what you are, we're here to fight with you. If you know others that want to get in this fight with us, reach out, info@navivalues.org. We're going to reach back out to you. We want you in this fight with us. We already have an incredible number of people who inspire me and these three each and every day. It's why we do what we do. And if you want to continue to get involved, please do so. Thank you all for being here. It's been an incredible hour, and this will be posted and you will be able to share it probably within the next couple of days on our website. Have a great night.
Thank you.